G'day guys, today on Connected we're going to have a look at these door trims. Let's see what we can do with them. Alright, so my first port of call on this part of the build was to go to the wreckers, and we found this nice new BRZ STI with some spare parts, including a pair of really nice door trims. I got a few other bits too for different parts of the build, and after a little bit of cleaning up, we are ready to go. So here are these BRZ STI door trims, just a little bit different to the ones in my car. Of course, the same design, but just a few different finishes on them. So they're pretty cool. I reckon that's going to be a good base to work off for my door builds. Ooh, look at those gloss black power window switches too. Nice. So these are a pretty cool set of door trims, and I can't wait to customize them, see what we can do with them to show off the speakers a little bit more. And this panel here is wrapped in a padded vinyl, and it's a slightly different grain to what I have on my 86 GTS. It's a little bit finer. And so, of course, I have got the knee pads which go on either side of the dash near the climate control to match up with them. And these are really nice because they're actually a stitched panel instead of a moulded plastic one, albeit padded, but moulded plastic that you find on the 86. So that's going to go together really well. But the plan for now is to get these off, see how they attach, see how they work, and see how we might be able to customize them. So one of the things I'm looking at, for example, is if I'm going to customize this back area here, how much room do I have to do it? And what do I have to cut and trim and customize back here in order to make that work? You know, I'd really love to be able to just customize the panel that you see on the outside without necessarily modifying any of the rest of the door structure. Since it all screws together, it can be swapped out for the original panel or for the modified one. So I've really got to keep a close eye on that as I'm pulling it apart to see how that's going to work. The other thing too is we've got power window switches on both doors, and they occupy almost the same space. So it's going to be really important to make sure that any modifications we make here don't affect the ability of the power window switch to work or for the wiring to connect to it. So let's pull it apart and see what's what. Okay, so with a bunch of screws removed, let's have a look. How does this come apart? Looks like the power window switch might be first. No, that comes off the outside. So excellent. That's our pad knee. It's our pad knee. Cool, that's brilliant. That is the freestanding piece with the stitching around it, the padded vinyl. A little bit grubby on the back here, but you can see how that is padded vinyl that attaches there, and cool. This is our speaker grille here. It's got a silver trim ring as well, and I'm wondering now that that's unscrewed, that should come apart because we're not necessarily going to use that again, but that is the grille with the silver trim ring. I suppose they can probably be separated too. Yeah, it looks like it. Not that that's overly important, but you know, someone who wanted to perhaps customize the color of that trim ring can certainly do so. So that's great, but this is the essence of what we're looking at here. This is the padded trim panel, and it really is just a single piece molded plastic panel with padded vinyl attached to it. So that's brilliant. That's what we want because that gives us options to change how this looks and retrim it. So that's pretty cool. All right, excellent. Okay, so let's have a look how a speaker nominally sits in here. And this is an Audison Voce AVX 6.5 coaxial. It's the same frame as the woofer, but obviously with a tweeter mounted. And that's roughly where it sits in the setup. You'll actually notice that this door trim, the speaker grille actually slopes, I guess, down and away from you slightly. So there's a little bit of a difference in angle between how the speaker sits on the door and how this trim sits, and we're going to have to try that out on the door to know for sure, especially when it comes to the relative depth of this speaker, where it sits in relation to the front of the door trim. We're going to have to check that out on the car, but you get an idea for how much room we have to work with there behind the trim, and you can also see roughly where that's positioned and how it sits. But of course, like I say, it sits back a little bit on the mount rather than on the trim, and you can actually tell that because of how the grille is. So the top edge is actually tilted forwards, and the whole thing is actually pointing down into the footwell rather than just straight across the car horizontally. So that's something we've got to contend with, but I reckon we can make the most of that. So now we're just looking at this trim, and what I want to know is, can I peel it? It would be really helpful if I could take this soft trim off with the stitching, keep it intact, and actually reuse it to finish the panel afterwards. So I'm going to peel it. Let's see what happens. Okay, let's have a look here. It's foam backed, and foam is usually pretty fragile. It also breaks down over time, so it might make a bit of a mess of it. But hey, look, that's coming off. Let's see what happens. So it's going to be really interesting. It's going to be really interesting to see how I can tie this design in with the rest of it. I've got an idea in mind, and I'd love to show you guys, but we're going to have to wait to see how this comes apart first. See, that's, oh wow, that's actually really only stuck down at the edge if you look at that. There's no glue around the rest of it, so that is a good sign for us. Okay, so I've got all these edges peeled. It really didn't seem to be that hard. There's only a couple of places where the foam has tried to separate from the vinyl a little bit, and I've tried to keep them together as much as I can, because that's only around on the back side. On the front, I'd really love to be able to keep that foam on there. So all these edges are peeled, and it's time to see if it's going to come off of the front. So let's see what happens. Ah, fantastic, look at that. That is barely attached. There is some slight tackiness there, but once I've peeled, I mean, that's just not attached at all. Oh, brilliant. Keep peeling. I'll peel carefully around here. There might be some more glue. Oh, barely. Right. Oh, that is fantastic. Let's keep going. Look at that. Oh, tremendous. All right, we have got, look at that, there's barely any glue on it. You can see the back of the stitching along here, and you can see a little bit of glue around the edge, and that is it. There's really nothing special going on there. And that is exactly what I wanted. That is brilliant. So I've successfully peeled a door panel. See this little locating tab they've made there, so that that edge, that corner, that's the top corner, pulls around the screw post really neatly, and holds that top edge in. That's really smart of them. But other than that, look, it's just a flat piece of vinyl that's got foam backing and some stitching. So that is exactly how I wanted that to go. It means I can set this aside, and all being well, once I've customized this, we can trim it back in this like it never left. That is marvelous. If the speaker's sitting behind the door trim like that, I'd like to cut this out with a little bit of a shape here, a little bit of a profile, and then make a dress baffle for the speaker to sit on, which is painted pearl white, the same as the body of the car. Add a little bit of LED lighting, and then reshape this to meet up with that dress baffle and the speaker underneath, so that they're exposed. They're still solidly mounted to the door, and this piece is customized to marry the two together and trimmed in the original vinyl that I've just peeled off successfully. Let's see what's going on under here. Fortunately, these doors being Toyota, not too hard to pull apart at all. 3 screws under a couple of covers here, and they're ready to come off. Now, if you notice some of these videos don't have sound underneath them, it's because I listen to music while I work, and YouTube thinks that is a sin. So you'll have to put up with the sound of my voice and some stock music instead, which we're allowed to put on there without getting in trouble with the copyright gods. So we've got that off, and this is the door. I've already treated this with SoundSkin sound deadening and built a speaker mount for the DLS splits that I have been running in here. So we have got a really good foundation for our speaker installation already, but these mounts are not going to stay because it's a little bit more complicated than that, believe it or not, for the install that I've got coming. So let's try that out. Let's have a look at the positioning. We've got our BRZ door trims here going on, with those grills removed, so we can have a look at what's going on behind the scenes. All right, so that's what we're working with there. It's actually sitting, because there aren't any clips, I'm pushing this into place, and sort of a finger width around there. That's pretty much level. There's a bit of a gap there, there's a bit of a gap there, so it does actually slope a fair bit, if you can see. Power window switch there. So I've got a fair bit of room to play with. So let's see how we can make it work. Here's the line I'm looking to cut on this panel for the design that I'm looking to end up with. And you'll notice it actually involves cutting the bottom part off completely, which is a little bit different to what I expected. Anyway, time to get an MDF panel cut so that we can make our dress baffle for the speaker to sit on. So I'm just tracing the shape here and doing a rough cut. Now, if only it was quite this easy. Anyway, in order to get this cut to size, I need to make a copy of it, and that involves securing this down. Of course, it's not a flat surface to just use double-sided tape, so I'm using hot glue instead. Especially on this MDF template, it's pretty easy to remove afterwards. Just trimming that all to shape with the copy bit. Obviously being very gentle. This is fairly soft plastic, and we don't want it to chatter or bend out of the way and result in an inaccurate shape. So just taking it really easy here to cut that shape out. And there's our shape. Fantastic. We pulled the speaker panel off, and that's what we've got. That's exactly what we're after. So time to chop up this panel. So I've got my line I've traced on here, and I'm using the oscillating tool to cut that. It's fairly easy to maintain a straight line and cut through that nice and easily. Beautiful sound, that oscillating tool. Okay, so I've been fettling a while longer. A little bit of trimming here and there, checking the fit, all of that, and we're at a pretty good point now. That is really shaping up how I'd like it to. It's amazing, really. I didn't think of cutting this whole bottom edge out, but now that I've been working on the car with the door trim, it's become so obvious that that's the right way to go, and it's really coming together. I like how this is looking. You can actually see, there's a bit of a void here where we're working around the inner door structure, really so that in the hope that we don't have to modify this door trim substantially apart from this speaker grille, I'd really like it to bolt into place. And so far we're getting there, it's pretty good. Those lines are really nice. This edge is working in pretty well here. Same here, and I mean that margin's really nice. So there's going to be LED lighting along the top here, and this bottom edge is going to glow as a result of that. It's hopefully going to look pretty cool. So you can see that edge there, and I hope you know what we're going to do about that. We're going to pull some fiberglass over this, put some resin on it, and we're not going to fiberglass it to this baffle. We're simply going to shape it. We're going to mask this off and shape it so that it takes its shape, and then trim it. And we can have that shape there, but this will be trimmed, that'll be painted, they'll sit together really nicely with any luck. So, what I plan to do is grab this trim piece, wrap it in fabric, and put it in place like that. And then I can use this with a pair of screws to pull that fabric down into the inlay shape that I want, and that's ready to do fiberglass resin. That's why this is all taped up. So I'm about to do the same to the driver's door here. I'm going to get these templates ready. Then I'm going to wrap these with fabric. I can put them in place. I might have to hold them in with a bit of glue just because they're so flimsy along this length. And then I can put some fiberglass resin on. Look, I think this process more or less explains itself, but this preparation is really important whenever you're fiberglassing on a panel that you actually want to use. You really don't want the slightest lift in the tape or a little bit of exposure ruining that panel for you, so taking the time to prep it up properly is really the way to go. Getting this fabric stretched over the shape is also really important because it's going to minimize the amount of extra finishing work that's needed. So just taking the time to make sure it pulls to the shape that I want it to, that there are no creases or wrinkles, and of course that the panel is sitting nice and flat like it should be before I set that in place with resin. And with fleecy, this is sort of something you'd see in a jumper, a wind cheater, or hoodie, whatever you want to call it. It's reasonably thick, so it actually takes a fair bit of resin to soak in and wet that out properly so it's a nice solid shape. And ready to remove it the next day. It's had a little bit of time to set up. Brilliant! That is exactly what I'm after. And of course, we've got to clean things up afterwards so these door panels are ready to use. Fortunately, I'm fairly experienced in masking tape, so that all came off nice and cleanly. The next step of our process is to reinforce these a little bit. Fleecy has a habit of losing its shape when it gets hot, things like that. So what we're using here is a fairly light woven fiberglass mat. It's very easy to form to this sort of shape. It's also very flat and very thin, so we're going to get a lot of strength without increasing our amount of finishing work here. Laying it on the front this time, of course, because that's where we have our clearance, so that I don't affect the fitment of the part into the door trim, wetting it out nicely and just making sure all the gaps are filled nicely. There's no voids or anything with this mat sitting in here. And this is a pretty special weekend in Australia, the weekend of the Bathurst 1000 Supercars race. So I had the telly on in the workshop for that event too. Now it's time for some acrylic work on the router. So I'm using 10mm clear acrylic here, fairly serious slab of plastic, and using our templates here to cut a speaker mounting ring. In fact, I'm cutting quite a few of them because we need to layer up our mount to the thickness that we need it. And a weird dusty job, this one, because the larger chips that come off of the acrylic don't really suck into the dust extraction quite the same. Using a solvent adhesive here now to glue the rings together, and I'm doing that before I copy the next layer so that they match perfectly and I don't have to worry about lining them up again later. I'm also making the base here. I'm using our Toyota template that mounts to the door in the factory mounting location, but I am oversizing the outside of it slightly, mainly because I've got the room for it, and that extra little bit of material will make that a little bit more solid mount. Okay, so we've got this thing test fitted to the car. Let's have a look. All right, so you can see our acrylic speaker mount base and our 6mm baffle panel. And there's actually not that big a gap to bridge, but it changes in depth all the way around. And it's not set on the horizontal or vertical axis, it's actually a combination between the two. So with this set in place in its final position, I've marked points at which we're going to measure the depth so we can actually get an idea of where it's all going to sit. So, time to start measuring. 38.2. 39.8. 41.4. So with those measurements taken, I've made this router sled with the speaker spacer aligned in it. You can see the stacks there, and I'm using the digit deleter to machine an angled face on it. So this should match up perfectly. It is very messy work, it's very noisy work, but it's a great way to make this angled speaker spacer exactly how I need it. You can even see my centering line there, so I know exactly how it lines up once I'm finished. So the only thing left to do now is to glue it to the base of the speaker mount on the door. And what we're doing is attaching that to our baffle plate that goes on the door trim in order to make sure that all lines up in the exact correct location. It seems to have worked really well here. So glue it in place, let that glue dry overnight in this case, and we'll come back to it in the morning. All right, it's morning, glue's dried. Let's check it out. Well, that looks absolutely brilliant. Great success. You'll notice that I have left some spare material on the base of that speaker mount on the inner circle. That's because I was waiting until it was all lined up perfectly. And then we're using the Sculpt L from 12 Volt Tools here to match those two and also just add a bit of a chamfer to it for really nice airflow behind that speaker. And that is the last step of getting these beautiful angled speaker mounts ready to go. Look at them. I'm really happy with these. It doesn't get much more solid than this when it comes to speaker mounting, and these are exactly angled and positioned where I need them to be. So before our finishing work, one of the last steps we have to do is cut our proper baffle plates for the door trims. So I'm using the MDF template that I've come up with here to copy 2 baffle plates out of 6mm acrylic. Clear acrylic, of course, for our desired finish. So we're copying them both to shape and leaving them both attached to the template. So they're both going to be on there at the same time, and that is for a very good reason, which you will see very shortly. So leaving them both attached makes it very easy to drill the holes in the correct spots on the drill press here. So they're drilled nice and square and in the right location. And our last step on these, using the large rabbiting bit at a lower router speed to cut a flush for the speakers in these panels. Really nice clearances on these, absolutely flush, beautiful fit and finish. That's exactly what I was going for. So these panels are ready. Now I've been doing some finishing work to the panels for the door trims, and we need some way to hold them in place now that we've lost some of these screw locations. So I've made up a little right angled metal bracket here, and we're using some epoxy to secure that to the trim. So that's going to hook into place nicely, and it's not going to lift and separate from the door trim once it's all assembled together. That just tilts and hooks into place. That trim clicks on. Oh, beautiful. Nice and solid, doesn't move around. It's not going to lift and come loose. Brilliant. So that marks the end of the door trim fabrication for now. It's actually been quite an odyssey. I've been working at this part of the build for quite a while. The next time you'll see these bits are when they're being finished and trimmed. So I think this is a really good place to end for now. So thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode of Connected.